Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So for the past few weeks in church, we've been dealing with pretty horrible things, I think. We've been talking about things that we wish Jesus never said, and it's been legitimate to say that because the things he said were difficult and unworkable and unwelcome interventions in our lives. This morning we're going to place all of that difficulty in its proper context by talking about one thing I'm glad Jesus did say. Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. The writer says that Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and every sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering pain, the possessed, those having seizures, the paralyzed, and he healed them. What the writer is telling us here is that Jesus did not speak to well-mannered, well-dressed people who lived well-ordered, successful lives. In fact, what the writer is telling us is that Jesus' original audience were every bit as dysfunctional and disorganized as you are. Their lives were every bit as disappointing and depressing. Jesus' audience, the people who first heard the announcement of the gospel, they were a mess. And I find that quite welcome news. Just me. Next sentence. Lots of subtleties here I won't get into. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, that's taboo. Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan, also taboo, followed him. So at this early stage in Jesus' career, Matthew's saying he was attracting big numbers. And the point being made here is that these big numbers were very much a mixed bag of nuts. We're not in these sentences talking about people who lived clean, simple, religious lives. Quite the contrary, in fact. We're talking about people whose lives were complicated, whose stories were difficult and disappointing. Then Matthew says that when Jesus saw all of these rejects, I shouldn't say Matthew said that, he didn't, that's my interpretation. He went up a mountainside and sat down. Two things to tell you here. First of all, Saint Matthew, is lying. Jesus did not go up a mountainside. When you hear the word mountain, you immediately think of something like this. Something that to get up would require ropes, oxygen, crampons, and ice axe perhaps. However, according to both legend and context, Jesus did not go up a mountain. No mountain like that exists in Galilee. He went up more of a little hill. Next slide, this is the view from the Mount of Beatitudes. It's 1,000 or so feet above sea level. Not by any means a mountain. No need for ropes. No need for oxygen or anything like that. Just a gentle stroll. This raises the question, why does he lie? Why does he obviously lie? Why does he obviously exaggerate? There must be a reason. Very simple. Matthew is writing this biography of Jesus to first century Jews. And when you speak to a first century Jew about religious teaching that comes from a mountain, their mind would have immediately gone to that other famous piece of teaching that came from a mountain. Remember the 10 Commandments, a list of rules and regulations that lays out the conditions and the benefits of living with God as your King. So Matthew, in teaching about Jesus' announcement of the kingdom of God in mountain language, is saying everything you're about to read, everything you're about to hear, for all of its difficulties, are somewhat akin to the 10 Commandments. This is going to be that equivalent for Christians. This is going to be about the rules and the conditions and the benefits of living your life in this Christian thing. And if you're anywhere at all in this process of discovering faith in Jesus or figuring out how to live your faith more genuinely, you may as well know that everything he goes on to say is horrible. And we looked at those over the last 9 weeks. What Jesus said in this mountainside sermon is disgustingly difficult. In this mountain teaching, Jesus called his followers to a lifestyle that wasn't just difficult, in fact, it was, in my view, impossible. When I read all of the things we spoke about over the last 9 weeks, I came away with a sense of thinking, if that's genuine Christianity, then not only am I not a genuine Christian, but nor can I ever be. That's what that left me with. For example, he said if you want to be a Christian, then your standards of morality have to surpass that of the Pharisees, who are extreme in their morality. At another point in the sermon, remember, he turned to the men in the crowd and said, guys, it's not enough for you to be able to say you've never checked into a motel room with a woman who isn't your wife. You have to be able to say you've never even thought about that. And if you have thought about it, you should leave church today and gouge out your eyes. Remember Jesus said that? Okay, I think I'll check out of Christianity at this point. In this mountain teaching, remember Jesus said, being a Christian means you have to show love and kindness, not to your family and friends, but to your enemies. It means you have to have a lifestyle regularly punctuated with prayer and fasting. Being a Christian means living a life utterly disinterested in money. It means being devoted entirely to its religious teachings. When we read all of the things over the last 9 weeks that Jesus said in this mountain sermon, it gave me a depressing sense that the standards of Christianity put Christianity beyond the reach of any would-be Christian. The best I can hope for, and you can hope for, is fraudulent faith. Maybe pretending, maybe muddling your way through. No more. And I think this is why Matthew begins the sermon by telling us that Jesus rolled up and sat down. Do you know that way when someone comes to visit you, and they say, "Do you mind if I sit down? I've got something to tell you." That's a verbal clue that what you're about to hear is big news. In the first century, whenever religious teachers had something big and important to say, they always sat down to say it. And then Matthew says after that Jesus began to teach them in the Greek language where the sentence was written in originally. It actually says Jesus opened his mouth and began to speak. Again, that's a verbal clue that what he's about to say is not ordinary information, but enormous information. If you lived in the ancient world and you said, "I'm about to open my mouth and speak," that would be you giving a clue that you really have to pay attention to this. And then he says, the first word of this important sermon, the first word in a sermon that we have labelled "things I wish Jesus never said," is the word blessed. Blessed are. Now, the word blessed, as you perhaps know, is a deeply religious word that basically means to be approved. For example, when the ancient Greeks spoke about the gods on Mount Olympus, they said that those gods lived a blessed life, by which they meant they lived lives free of pain and disease and poverty. They spent all day eating grapes and hanging out by the pool. And when the ancient Greeks said that they are blessed, what they meant was, we approve of their life. Like, the life they live must be awesome, and we approve of that. Similarly, when the ancient Greeks spoke of the island of Cyprus, they said that that island is a blessed isle, by which they meant its soil was so fertile, its economy was so rich, its women were so beautiful. They thought that a person would never have to live anywhere else in their life to find happiness and peace and prosperity. In fact, the word Cyprus means the blessed isle. Let's look at my favourite fantasy, one I think about more often than I should. This is my beachfront property in the British Virgin Islands. It's not actually my beachfront property, it's the one that exists in my fantasies. And my fantasies about this property are quite specific. I know what I'll do here every day. I'll go diving in the morning, I'll go fishing in the afternoon, and then in the evening I'll sit on the beach and watch the sun set on another perfect day in my perfect life. I would say of this life that it is blessed. That is, I approve of myself living here like this. Any disagreements? So when Jesus uses the word blessed, when he begins his difficult religious teaching with this word, what he means is God approves. Listen carefully. To talk, therefore, about people who are blessed is not to talk about the things that God has given to those people. Rather, it is to talk about what God thinks of those people. To talk about a person who is blessed is to talk about a person whom God looks at and says, yes, I approve. That's awesome. That's awesome. How you're doing it, I like it. Good job. This is the biblical meaning of the word blessed. And so when Jesus says, can I sit down? Because there's something I need to tell you. I need to tell you who the blessed people are. I need to tell you who God approves of. The immediate assumption we have is that we're about to hear what we've always heard, that there's a system, and the system works around our morality and our successful living of the Christian life. That if we want God to think well of us, then we need to up the ante on our Christianity. That as Jesus tells us who the blessed people are, the best thing that we can do is take out our pens and our notepads and take notes and then leave church and do what it is we've heard so that God will think well of us and say that we are blessed. That is the assumption with which we listen to every single piece of religious teaching we've ever heard. Right? It's something we have to do. It's information we have to take and then apply, and then there'll be benefits. But look at what Jesus says. This forms the framework of all of the difficulty we've heard over the last 9 weeks. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. The word poor is, of course, a negative word. It describes a condition to which no right-thinking person would ever aspire. The Bible uses 2 words for poor, principally. The main word is a word that describes poor as in your kind of poor. So living pretty much month to month, paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes a bill comes in, sometimes it's difficult to pay. Doing what you're doing every day in the knowledge that you'll still be doing it when you're 75 because the pension ain't going as well as you'd like. You know, kind of person who never has much left over for a rainy day. So there's that kind of poor in the Bible. But the word that Jesus uses for poor here describes the sort of person for whom every day is a rainy day. The sort of person who is so poor that if someone doesn't give them money for lunch, then they don't have lunch. This word poor comes from a verb which means to lower your head in shame, as people who live difficult lives are often wont to do. And notice, please, especially the socialists among you, that Jesus uses this word in conjunction with a person's spirit, with their inner being, with who they are on the inside. So he's not saying that God approves of the financially poor. That would be understandable and disturbing, I think, in equal measure. What he's saying is that God approves of the person who's bankrupt on the inside. God approves of the person who has got nothing left in their soul. It's all gone so wrong. They screw up so regularly. They fail so often that they are a shell of the person they would wish to be. They are desperate and degenerate and tired because of it. God approves of this. In other words, Jesus is saying, if you listen to all of this teaching that I'm about to give you, that we've looked at over the last 9 weeks, and you conclude at the end of it that the standards of Christianity put Christianity beyond you, if you conclude at the end of it that you are too screwed up, too damaged, too weak to make any kind of genuine stab at this Christian faith, then God approves. Your feelings are right. Now, the really unsettling thing here, of course, is that this is not like some parts of the Bible in that it says what it says in order that you might go and do what it says. This isn't advice. This isn't morality. This isn't even teaching in the classic sense. This is just an announcement. And it's counterintuitive. It's almost anti-religion. So Jesus is speaking to a large crowd of dysfunctional people, and he says, blessed are you in your dysfunction. Blessed are you in your immorality. Blessed are you in your failure. Blessed are you in your lack of moral resolve. Blessed are you when everything goes wrong and you just can't seem to get anything right. God approves of you in your ugliness, in your darkness. This makes no sense. This is counter to every one of our religious instincts. The impression that we give you in church is that the bar on morality and religious observance is very high. That there are standards that ought to be met. And when the church gives you that impression, it always sounds so right and so logical. And yet for all its logic, it is in fact a contradiction of the very gospel the church says it proclaims. This opening line of Jesus' most difficult sermon seems to say that the Christian life is not for you until you accept it is beyond you. That try as you might, your best efforts don't take you very far at all. Christianity is not for the morally strong, but the morally weak. Sensing a huge pushback from you. So I'm going to skip over the next 5 minutes. Maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Maybe you know more than I do. I can't imagine that's the case, but okay, let's say I've got this wrong, and you're right to feel what you're currently feeling. Let's imagine that the whole God, Jesus, salvation, heaven, Christianity thing is the moral and religious equivalent of getting into the Navy SEALs. You know, the sort of thing where most people don't apply because they self-select and they assume they're not good enough. And so they don't even bother trying. And of the few who do apply, very few make the grade because they simply don't have what it takes. That's how we assume that the whole God, heaven, Jesus, salvation thing works. And so as soon as we think about those most religious of subjects, we immediately think about how we have to up the ante on our religious observance and try harder. And we assume that we have to be a better person, we have to be a good person. And I'm all for being a good person, in theory. No, I think I am. I'm all for other people being good, anyway. But what happens if you're not a good person? What then? What if it's too late for that? Then where are you? Well, you could try being better, I guess. You could read your Bible as though it was some kind of improvement manual. So if you've had an abortion, you could read the bits that talk about how precious life is. That would be good. If you can't stop looking at porn in your basement, you could read the sentences that talk about how you shouldn't look lustfully at another human being with your eyes. If you've got a track record of making really horrible decisions, there's a great part of the Bible called the Book of Proverbs that teaches you how to make good, wise life choices, and all of that would be good advice. There's tons of good advice to be found in the Bible and in religion and in Christianity, and I'm all for it, except the teaching of Jesus isn't called good advice. It's called good news. And there's a difference. And to think of that good news as being a moral and religious standard to which you must adhere is to make that good news neither good nor news. Writing to the early church, the Apostle Paul said, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. For in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed." Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, "For in the morality of we early Christians, a righteousness from God is revealed. In our own living of the Christian life, a righteousness from God is revealed." No, that's not how they saw it. Their view of the Christian life was that it came from God. It was something God gave. So clearly, being a Christian is not therefore similar to self-improvement. This thing we do Sunday by Sunday is not primarily about applying the right information, the right discipline, in order that a right life may be the result. It's about understanding that God has got good news for you in your dysfunction and disappointment. One of the things I've always hated about church, I don't think we're like this, but in case we ever are, I'll say it. One of the things I always hated about church is that it's a bit like an AA meeting where everyone shows up and say, "I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem. I'm good. I'm good. And if I want to get better, I just be better." This is a slap in the face to the gospel. And it is for that reason that when Jesus sits down to talk about the core things of Christianity, he frames it in a presupposition of being poor in spirit. At this point, this is not a sermon that can be applied. It is not a thing that is to be preached and then put into practice. It's just an announcement that comes to us and says, there is a mountain that you must climb. And the first thing that you must realize as you look at that mountain is that you cannot climb it. And that any attempts to do so are proof that you've not understood it. The gospel is not a neat system that explains how you can get God to approve of you. It is an announcement that he already approves of you, that he's already with you, he's already for you, that he's looking at you right now as you are in your disappointment and dysfunction. And he's got his thumbs up and he's saying, yes, I love you the way you are. Right now. Right now. Any questions on any of that? I'm so proud that you've asked that question. Because asking that question demonstrates that you understand the absurdity of the gospel. And I know that because this is the very question that both Christians and critics of Christianity asked 2,000 years ago. The apostles themselves had to field this question. If what you're saying is true, does that mean I can sin as much as I like? Right? The apostles, when they were asked that question, said with an exclamation mark at the end of the sentence, by no means. So no. No. So I'm sorry. And I think primarily because it demonstrates a lack of gratitude. If I'm in a relationship with someone, for example, and I love them unconditionally, if they respond to that love by doing anything they like, by taking that love for granted, that demonstrates enormous dysfunction in the relationship. And that's not a good thing. So I think responding to God's kindness by living any way we like says something quite negative about our understanding and our seriousness in the Christian faith. So no. But asking the question, that's the question we should all be leaving church with. Can I leave here right now and do anything I like? Is that what that means? Is that what that means? You understand the gospel if that's what you're thinking. And the answer is no. Jesus says what he says for a reason, of course, and there was a whole bunch of things I didn't get into, but there's clues at the start of this sentence that for example, Jesus says that part of the audience came from the Decapolis. Anyone who lived in the Decapolis in the first century could not have been a legitimate God-following Jew. They just couldn't. They were excluded for reasons of their lifestyle. So Jesus is talking to people here who didn't fit into any kind of proper religious framework. They wouldn't have been all that welcome in the synagogues. Many of them wouldn't have been allowed into the temple in Jerusalem. They were just on the outs. So Jesus is speaking to people on the outs. And in saying what he's saying here, he seems to be saying, you are actually where it's all about. I don't want you to think that you have to try hard so you can be like those people who've got it all right, because that's not where it's at. You're okay the way you are. But let's talk about a few issues. Good question. Okay, we're clean out of time. I've got to go. Thanks for coming. See you next time.